Welcome to Masterclass. It's the end of the semester. We have a little bit of time to cover some movies. I know we said we'd talk about Star Wars. I wanted to talk one thing about Star Wars that I think is interesting that I've listed in my book, Film Theoretics. You can also find that in COURSERA textbooks and on the Aaron Sheley by Film Theoretics by Aaron Sheley page. There's also a Film Theoretics too that deals with exploitation films, and it's a pretty good one. The first one deals with classical Hollywood cinema and the art films of Europe. Speaking of the art films of Europe, there was a lot of influence of the samurai film, and that was in Japan, in both European Italian spaghetti westerns and that were a co-American project. There was also samurai films all over the Western film, and we had talked about that. One thing that's interesting about that is Star Wars is the ultimate samurai goal. Star Wars creates a religion, it creates a passion for the Force and everything in it. We saw kind of how the covers illustrated the story. It goes from from good to bad to good, and it's kind of like a Flash Gordon setup. We also talked, what I wanted to tell you about, not so much about the religion of the Force, because there's a lot of Zen Buddhism that emanates the idea of an immaculate soul and immaculate body that can take on any adventure and take on any threshold guardians and get to their goal and get to the treasure. I wanted to thank the Library of Congress and the Wizards of the Coast for helping with this class, and also Dr. Casper and Dr. Wagner's ever-loving advice. Star Wars is pretty much covered, except for one thing's interesting. We talked about how Natalie Portman's character in the first three, and we always had these big stars like Alec Guinness and Natalie Portman mixed in with these other stars that were like made just for Star Wars by George Lucas. And the characters of the females are represented in such a good way that like no female is bad. And I know that kind of puts females on a pedestal, but Padme becomes this like, she's the queen of the universe basically at first. Then she's like senator of the universe. And then she's like princess of the universe. So what's really interesting is she kind of goes in a backward roundabout pattern, gaining her prestige because she's already queen of the universe in one. And in two, she's senator of the universe. She stepped down as someone else's queen after a year. But she's actually gone up a notch because the senators are above the queens in a weird way. Because get this, when she marries Anakin, she's queen, princess of the galaxy, and it's an even bigger galaxy at stake because it's with Anakin. Now that we covered that, I'd also like to thank the director Spike Lee, who I'm sorry, but like I like a lot of other directors, and I'm gonna have to put him at the top. We got Robert Zemeckis, Ron Howard, and Spike Lee, and of course Spielberg and Scorsese are still at it. May they live another 100 years. They probably will. They'll probably hook themselves up to an AI bot and find Stanley Kubrick and keep making movies. Although they'll call them AI and they won't be, they'll actually be directed by their force, religion, Zen Buddhist ghosts that are coming out of the grave and making movies still. But thanks Harvard, thanks USC, thanks CalArts. We got the last class of the day. We're first going to look at this Nibelungen, and it's funny we talked about Star Wars because Nibelungen actually is German for the ring cycle, and this is a Fritz Lang UFA movie that's found on Kino Video, and we looked far and we looked wide, and you can still order it on Amazon. Amazon has tons of these titles from Criterion and Kino. We saw we hit a Criterion Bonanza a while back, but I'm going for Kino too, because Kino is where you find all the really rare and hard to find films. This film is worth about $50, and you can buy it for about $40. It has a dragon in it. There's a battle scene with a dragon. It has all the ring cycle elements, but really it only, in the ring cycle, there's Rheingold, Siegfried, Valkyrie, and Götterdämmerung. And this one has, this one that specializes on Siegfried and a little bit of Rheingold and the Valkyrie. But it also has the Fall of the Gods, or Götterdämmerung, compacted in, that originally was all four, and that the censorship system and the cutting out for lack of time to show in the theaters. And you got to understand, silent films, this was 1926, and silent films always show the story of the silent film in the way that the story becomes the medium, because in the silent film they're showing the visual medium of cinema total, and so it's worldwide now. It's so popular, entertaining, sublime bliss that it's worldwide. And internationally, everybody sees these on the market, and everybody understands them because the subtitles are changed to their language. And in Nibelungen, it was a world hit, but they had to cut it down to basically, Siegfried's story. And Siegfried fights this beautiful dragon. It's like the Thief of Baghdad, which we're getting to next. There's this beautiful scene with swords. There are all these mysterious scenes with dwarves building this ring, and all these Lord of the Rings-ish images all throughout. And you can see how it's even more advanced in some ways than the computer imagery digital media, although that is way more advanced, and that's what Star Wars relied on in the second half, 1, 2, and 3, told all out of sequence, like Padme's transition from Queen. You have 4, 5, and 6, 1, 2, and 3, and it's like these recurring stairwells. But in Nibelungen, there's something interesting that happens, because after he takes on the king of Germany of the ring to take on Valhalla's kings that are set in place, so he can have the princess, or Kriemhilde or Broomhilde, who is again mentioned in, of course, Django Unchained, because in Django Unchained they talk about Broomhilde being Jamie Foxx's character Django's wife, and the German is beset on telling everyone that we're going to go rescue Broomhilde. Well, he goes and rescues her, but he turns invisible with the ring. Something that's really rare about this film is it gives him the ring of invisibility. That's the ring. And he does the 3 tasks against the king. And ironically, halfway through the movie, Siegfried gets killed on a whim. He trips and falls and dies. Everything goes perfect. He fights hordes of soldiers. It's like Alexander Nevsky. He's winning all these wars. And that's actually a sound film by Eisenstein. But that he dies accidentally, and the whole rest of the movie is this brutal revenge. But revenge on who? Because didn't he die accidentally? But now it's the king's fault that Broomhilde's pissed, and she's leaving him anyway, and she's bringing in the Mongols, and that's just like the Richard Wagner opera, and the Richard Wagner opera matches this perfectly. And I think you'll love it as a movie because the revenge is great. When Kriemhilde torches the whole kingdom because Siegfried's dead and he's laying in the coffin, you can see the Alexander Nevsky and Nibelungen already in the Star Wars movies, and that Star Wars lends to a lot of samurai, but also silent films and European art films, is interesting because those seem to be the films always taught in a class. This is Douglas Fairbanks in The Thief of Baghdad, and you got to understand Douglas Fairbanks was one of the ones that opened United Artists with Griffith, Pickford, and Chaplin. He was one of the biggest stars of moviedom history, one of the first stars of moviedom history. This is a later film for him in the 20s, around the time John Barrymore was taking lead roles too, and The Sheik by Rudolph Valentino was a few years before. But this one is one of the infamous magic carpet races, because you can see the magic carpet in Destiny, you can see the magic carpet in Leaves of Satan's Book, theoretically, and that there's even another Thief of Baghdad by Michael Palin and Marek Pressburger after the Royal Walsh, which is the challenging defensive one, with another huge spider battle, an underwater battle. He jumps from, like Mario, from cart to cart. He's beautiful, Douglas Fairbanks. That it was Raoul Walsh that directed it's interesting, because Raoul Walsh learned from B.W. Griffith and was actually in Birth of a Nation. I don't know what part he was, because there's a guy in Birth of a Nation, even that I should know this, being chaired. It's funny because you can't tell if he's 21 or 21 parts. It's not Richard Barthelmess, but there's an actor that's in this D.W. Griffith movie that's in 22 parts, and he's an obscure part, but he plays 22 different characters. So the fact that Raoul Walsh is like skimmed to the background, but learning to be this big director, and later becomes like a B director, but from America, almost Fritz Lang style. Like he traveled from A movies to B movies in the same way, but everybody thought the B movies were better anyway at that time because they were film noir. But the Raoul Walsh made Thief of Baghdad so wild because there's even a Pasolini version of Arabian Nights that's based on it, but deals more with the sexuality and erotic nature of the theme of Arabian Nights, which also deals with the original book, which is from India, from the Middle East, and it's a beautiful book, and it's Arabian Nights, and it usually gets me stuck on the part where the genies come out. and that there are genies in all of this, and Disney's Aladdin kind of covers that too. But it's a beautiful film. I very much recommend it. It's from the Cohen Film Collection, and lately I've been wondering if it doesn't have even just as great as some of the visuals for all silent films are so beautiful, and these fantasy films are gorgeous. Now, this is one I really want to talk about for a minute, and we're back to Carl Dreyer, and I wanted to mention that this is The Passion of Joan of Arc, and this is a Criterion, one of the earlier Criterion releases from the early 2Ks, late 90s of Passion of Joan of Arc, and that it's a really expensive disc, but worth it. It has a score on it by Voices of Light, but it's made later for the movie that was originally showed silently that we all know in Godard's My Life to Live. This film was shown as a silent film that the character of Anna Karina goes to see in a theater, and it foreshadows the whole plot of My Life to Live, except in My Life to Live, she's going through the prostituting position, and this is Joan of Arc. I want to give you a little history because actually the movie was made about religion, which is a lot of what Swedish and Danish films are made like, that Carl Dreyer's is actually Swedish and Denmark, but mainly Denmark is interesting because you don't find a lot of other filmmakers from Denmark. There are some, but very interesting that Carl Dreyer chose religion as religious inquisition as the topic, because what happens is she, like the precursor is, we all know she was told by God to go into battle and win the French War, and she goes into battle and wins the French War. But what I don't understand is why right away after they win the war, they're like, well, we got to execute her just like we're executing all the witches. You know, we're doing the hexen thing, killing witches. We're also killing people that aren't good enough Christians. And basically, women aren't even Christians because they don't even have a voice of their own. This is the Middle Ages, you know, and they're representing it in this expressionist, close-up, racking camera courtroom trial that's totally the opposite of Bresson's The Passion of Joan of Arc, or The Trial of Joan of Arc. But this one has these like upside down prison bars, and the prison riot at the end is totally reflective of Battleship Potemkin, and that the whole town gets blown up because she dies is interesting. But that she's tortured so much in a scene where it feels like the audience is being tortured, that she says she was never a Christian, didn't hear from God, and accidentally went in, and they're not going to kill her. But as she's going out, she remembers that she believes in God one more time, like she's called again. And the transcendent moment is when she's like, no, you got to kill me because I really heard from God. And that's beautiful because most films think of God in a way that's a non-contextual, and even the religious films do, because you can't just like take a picture of God. I took a picture of God once. It didn't turn out very good on the camera. It looked really rancid and ridiculous, but God never poses for a picture, but he's really in some movies, and I don't know if he's real or not, but he's in this movie, Passion of Joan of Arc. The fact that she hears from him after she's about to be tortured and saying she never heard from him, that's all she has to say, but she won the battle strategically by hearing from him. And all it is this dicey Inquisition and the Inquisitor footage of, like, say, Kierkegaard, and the Inquisitor footage he's talking about is Dostoevsky, where Jesus talks to the Grand Inquisitor, you know, and the Grand Inquisitor says, Jesus, we don't need you anymore because no one believes in you anymore. They believe in a concept of you, but not in you. And Jesus basically walks out crying. And I feel that if any movie would have made Jesus cry, man, it would have been The Passion of Joan of Arc. That The Trial of Joan of Arc is a lot more cut like a Bresson film is interesting because it's the only crowd shots, one of the only times he uses crowd shots in the film that are maintaining that he's got this sound film idea, and it's just the trial, and it's like this cold, staunch trial. But the one with the Voices of Light on the Criterion disc by Dreyer is just nailed home as this. There are other Joan of Arc movies too that are good, but we're just going to say that masterpiece of one of the greatest masterpieces of all time, and all of these ones I've been showing you are the silent masterpieces of epic times. And this one I'm really interested in because it's Cecil B. DeMille. Cecil B. DeMille comes into the film industry in 1914 working on the Edison Griffith branch of making the Squaw Man, which is ridiculous because it's like, we got to go kill the last Indian. You know, it's not Last of the Mohicans where the last Indian is dying. It's like, we got to go kill the last Indian in Squaw Man. and they kill the last Indian within minutes of the film, and the rest of them's kind of riding around on a horse and matching action. But Cecil B. DeMille's beautiful. He's one of the most gaunt, expressionist, wild Hollywood classical. He blacklisted everybody, decadent. He's mean. He's terrible. He's beautiful. He's made about 85 films, but longer than most because he's got this like Bible predilection, even though again he's not really biblical because nobody in film really is, because you can't capture God, excuse me, on a film. But this is one of the most beautiful Jesus movies. Now you got to remember, Jesus movies are like a genre of their own. There's like 20 or 30 of them that I can think of that all stand a place in like decent film range. The King of Kings is one of the early ones, but you got to remember that when silent film was launched in America as a feature with more than one reel, you had Judith of Bethulia from The Ranger to the Cross and Oliver and a King Henry type thing. They're all coming out at the same time, Oliver Twist, and then King of Kings is years later after From the Manger to the Cross, and it's like the Book of John perfected, and that like Gospel according to St. Matthew is one of the greats, and From the Manger to the Cross is one of my favorites, and Last Temptation we can't deny, but the King of Kings is right up there with them, and it was remade in the sound era to not the same effect. Was because they moved big crowds in the silent eras, like I was talking about. It's the irony of the Trial of Joan of Arc, which has a big crowd, and that's a sound crowd. These are big silent film crowds like they had in Cabaret, only now it's the Jesus story down to the detail. And I'm just going to leave the whole situation for one thing. Jesus walks by in the crowd holding his cross, and suddenly like this leper is healed or something, and you're like, just his presence is so awing. You can actually, if you have a cold or something, watch this film and Jesus will wave at you and you'll just, your cold will go away, But it's a really beautiful film. The Cecil B. DeMille's story is kind of maddening because he was cutting off everybody, never really liked his relatives that were in the film business. Was kind of an old grump, and then makes all these beautiful movies like even Cleopatra, the original. And I'm not talking about the 4-hour Elizabeth Taylor version. I'm talking about the Cleopatra, the sound version from the 20s, and it's got Claudette Colbert, and it's beautiful. And there's this scene in it that's a tracking shot from way forward to way back of this whole lovemaking scene that puts it all into perspective. That Cecil B. DeMille knows how to direct a big kind of spectacle. He knows how to do spectacles, and that spectacles are really big in the 50s with Ben-Hur and stuff, and Spartacus in the 60s. Spectacles are a huge thing, and this is one of the original tied together spectacles. So that Cecil B. DeMille had a spectacle film, which is like the huge crowd mass movement, action adventure, forward thrusting cinema of legends, and Christianity did a lot of spectacle films. Now, I'm going to look at this one really quick. This is October, and this is actually I'm not sure, Image Entertainment. We got Image Entertainment. That last one was Criterion. Again, we want these films. We want you to own these. These should be in your bookstore or in your, I doubt they'd be there because we're just establishing that, but they should be in your local movie shop, or if there isn't a movie shop, find it on the internet. This whole class is on the internet. We're forgetting one thing. We're all tied to the internet. Now, October is an interesting film because it was made 10 years after the Russian Revolution, and again, it was made around the time of Battleship Potemkin, and again, it was made while the revolution was going on till the end of it. That the montage of Eisenstein in this one is distinctly different from the Battleship Potemkin in terms of that's almost a cubic, like Tetris kind of pattern in Battleship Potemkin that's episodic. Now we can talk about the last two syntams, the bracket syntam and the circuitous syntam, and the elliptical syntam. The bracket, we know, holds them all together and is this rounded version of shots that's like Hollywood classical cinema that twists it all together. The circuitous method is almost an achronological diachronic, where the end hits the beginning and the beginning hits the end, and everything else in between can be told accordingly. Is somewhat of the circuitous ending, but that it has two scenes doubled at the beginning and most likely the end that tie it together is how we get to that one. And then the elliptical is that we have everything foreshadowed in one section, and everything that was deemed to happen in part two happens like a Kubrick film. Now, there's so many more syntams, and Christian Metz writes about it in his film theory books, and I write about it in my film theoretics, and I'm presumptuous to say that I would ever be on the level of Christian Metz, although I have met him, and he's a real nice guy. Or I don't know if he's still alive, but years ago I went to Europe. Now, a film by Sergei Eisenstein, October. What I remember about this is actually different than Battleship Potemkin because everything goes right in this. The triumph grows. Everything goes closer. And it's got this one scene that I'd like to bring up before I bring up the last one and excuse you all till next semester. And that is the scene where it says that you have to choose between God, country, or cinema. And that God, country, and cinema are the most important things to Eisenstein. And then again, God's in the movie at all, but you never see him. Like he's in real life and you never see him, or is he, you know? But you have the top section where it's God, it plays God. And then it shows all these idols, like these in the kingdom, in the Kremlin and stuff. And then that it's country because it shows all the patriotism of the country. These are really adaptations of like Americana, but that it takes cinema into account kind of puts it ahead of things and shows why it's already counted its own montage as being so mathematically circuitous and elliptical, so perfected in where the images go and how you divide scenes by the seconds that they're divided by, and that the 1 second in time is off just so you can prove that the next shot's going to be shorter, and it seems to move faster if it's shorter, and then if it's shorter first and goes to longer, it seems to move slower almost because it's getting bigger as it goes. You have all this editing lined out in this, and he's choosing God first, cinema first, or God first, country second, and cinema third. When it's showing country, there's all these country things. God, there's all these idols. And cinema, there's a big freaking camera filming the whole thing. And I'm not afraid to tell you that I'm going for cinema first, man. Because cinema for the sake of cinema always gets you out of problems like ideological problems. Cinema for the sake of cinema is let's go, let's push it. I'm sorry, the ideology falls apart. Like it doesn't work in society. That's why you can't really imitate what you see even in The Thief of Baghdad. Because as much as I've wanted to ride a magic carpet, I haven't been able to. The Big Parade is an interesting film because it's one of my favorites. I actually named one of my rock band's albums after it, the Dead Tellurriders, when I used to have that band. And The Big Parade is such a masterpiece. I mean, it's just this beautiful film, and it's a war film. It's about World War One, and then it's King Vidor. King Vidor, think of it, the man who was the assistant director on almost every movie of the 30s. King Vidor, who had started the idea of Wizard of Oz and had been all through the silent film, makes this film about really good war movie and establishes what the war movie is for this time. That they go to boot camp, that they get enlisted, but they're all happy. It's not like this dismal war thing where like you're going to see decimated bodies or something in the shot. Although you do at one point in the film, and that they're going to war, going to Europe and flying to go there with their best friends, and they're in love with the same women. So the perfect war movie. I mean, even the movie Pearl Harbor has that in it. And that this is a Hollywood classical film is true, and that it's set up in this kind of bracket syntam, but it's so elliptical. And again, we say that the elliptical is taking the sides and making them flowery and almost putting these amazing intertitles in, and that we have John Gilbert and Renee Adore, it says on the cover, but John Gilbert's one of these really masterful stars. He's like going to be with Greta Garbo in some films and that we'll talk about next semester. And the thing about these war movies is they have the great aerial photography, they have the great friend play, they have the scene where they're in the bar hitting on the same chick, but everybody's happy and everything's going smoothly. It's weird how the classical war movie, everything goes like clockwork. It all goes forward just like regularity. They fall in love with the girl, they have to leave boot camp, they have to go to Europe, one of them gets killed almost, they go back, everybody's happy, they get drunk again and hit on the same girl in a bar, That's like What Price Glory by Howard Hawks. I mean, it's great war movies where they don't complain. They love life. They love their girl. They love their God. They love their country, and they go to battle. And that they see some effed up stuff is true, but that they don't really complain and don't really stop and do a whole humanities lecture on the war. I'm not saying that you can't do that, but at this time they were more interested in saving Europe completely. And if this is interesting, because if we hadn't saved Europe, do you really think we'd have all the films by them, even the ones that were fighting against us? So I'm not like getting all pro-war on you or telling you we should all go gung-ho into the field, but one of the last things I'll leave you with is that one of the reasons that American cinema dominates is because they were doing it all through the tumultuous times they were winning a war, and even at the worst of it with Vietnam, when they did stop with the social manifesto of rights and wrong of killing in war. You know, nobody thinks it's right, but it has necessary evil and all these things. And then it would all come to it. I'll be right there. And it would all come to a head as this sort of Saving Private Ryan moment where everybody's getting blitzkrieg bopped, and you're going, well, this is a faction of war where you're socially humiliated and still pushing forward to the cause. And that Tom Hanks is in it at all is so big parade, because that's like Mr. Handsome is going to lead the way. I love it. Mr. Regular Guy Joe that loves his wife is going to lead the way to the battle. Per masterpiece. But y'all go this winter knowing that you don't have to go to war. You have to choose cinema over God and country in my class. That's the one thing I'm requiring. That formal considerations in your final paper will be decided by the COURSERA unit, but remember it's genre, mythology, iconography, conventions, it's auteur. If you can give me the genre conventions and the auteur conventions, auteur being director and genre being type of narrative made, then we can discuss formal considerations on a level that can pass you from this class. Thank you for coming to COURSERA. We'll see you next spring. And don't work too hard. And remember, this is the last of the tail end of the first semester, and I hope you had as riotous time as I did. Sorry it got a little rocky in there. We'll come back a little stronger next time, but we'll be okay, and thank you all for taking this COURSERA Harvard USC CALARTS class.